The first time the lie almost collapsed was in the elevator of a glass tower that reflected the city like a cold, watchful eye. The doors slid shut with a soft chime, and the silence inside felt louder than any alarm. His palms were damp. His heart beat in his throat. The mirror above the buttons showed a man who looked calm, steady, capable, yet behind that face lived a secret so fragile it could shatter his world if it slipped into the light. The moment stretched, thin as glass, and he realized that sometimes the smallest choices carry the weight of an entire life. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and the quiet bravery it takes to protect the people we love, take a second to like this video, comment what kindness means to you, share this story with someone who needs hope, and subscribe to the Kindness Chronicles, because stories like this only grow when hearts gather around them. He had learned to build a life out of careful steps and practiced smiles. Every morning began before dawn, when the city still breathed in its sleep and the sky hovered between night and promise. He packed lunches with neat precision, folded small socks that carried the warmth of tiny feet, and pressed a kiss to a forehead that still believed the world was safe because he stood in front of it. The apartment was modest, but it carried the soft echoes of laughter that arrived in bursts and vanished just as quickly into the rhythm of school days and bedtime stories. He told himself that this was enough, that love could fill the spaces left behind by loss, that routine could quiet the ache of what had been taken from him. But beneath the structure of his days lay a constant fear, the fear of being seen too clearly by people who had the power to take everything he had rebuilt. Work was where he wore his strongest armor. The glass tower rose above the city like a promise to those who believed in climbing, and inside it moved people who spoke in careful language about value and optics. And risk. He had arrived there not because he belonged to their world, but because he had learned how to make himself useful to it. He solved problems quietly, stayed late without complaint, and never asked for more than he could afford to lose. Yet the higher he climbed, the more he felt the ground beneath him thin. Policies and background checks, whispered expectations about flexibility and image, casual remarks about the kind of stability leaders were supposed to have. All of it pressed against the truth of his life. He was a single father in a world that pretended to celebrate diversity while quietly measuring people against narrow silhouettes of acceptability. The secret he guarded was not scandalous in a moral sense, it was dangerous only because of how easily institutions can turn human lives into risks to be managed. The day everything trembled began like any other. The city was bright with a clean, false optimism that comes after rain, and the lobby hummed with the low music of ambition. He stepped into the elevator, already rehearsing the calm neutrality he wore when executives were near. The ride upward felt longer than usual, each floor chiming like a countdown. When the doors opened, the hallway was alive with movement, and then he noticed the cluster near the conference room doors. The faces turned slightly, the posture of people who had just recognized something they were not meant to see. His breath caught. He understood, in a way that bypassed thought, that his carefully hidden life had brushed too close to the surface. Somewhere, somehow, the truth of his responsibilities, the softness of his mornings, the way his world revolved around a small human heartbeat, had been glimpsed. He felt the familiar urge to fold inward, to become smaller, to disappear into competence and silence. It was then that the woman stepped into his space like a sudden warmth. She had always been part of the background of his days, a steady presence with an easy laugh and a way of noticing when people were struggling without putting them on display. In that charged moment, she moved with the instinct of someone who recognized danger and chose courage. The hallway narrowed around them. The eyes of others lingered. And the choice she made was simple and reckless and deeply human. She closed the distance between them and placed herself where rumors could not breathe without being noticed. The world tilted in the smallest, most seismic way, and in that tilt, his secret cracked open, not to expose him, but to shield him from the sharpest edge of judgment. The kiss was not a performance of desire, it was a quiet declaration of alliance in a room that had forgotten how to see people as more than positions on an org chart. It was a bridge built in a heartbeat, an act of kindness disguised as normalcy. The onlookers turned away with the relieved indifference of those who had found a story they could understand. He stood there stunned by the weight of what had just happened, aware that the lie he had leaned on had shifted into something more complicated. The world had accepted a version of him that fit its narrow comfort, and while the relief was immediate, the cost pressed in later, heavy and slow. He thanked her with his eyes because words would have broken the fragile balance of the moment. The hallway resumed its rhythm, and life moved on as if nothing extraordinary had occurred, yet inside him, something had begun to change. In the weeks that followed, the glass tower felt less like a fortress and more like a maze of mirrors. He noticed how easily narratives formed around people, how quickly assumptions filled the spaces where truth was inconvenient. The woman who had stepped into his danger never asked for anything in return. She treated him with the same steady kindness as before, yet the silence between them held a new gravity. He carried the gratitude like a stone in his pocket, solid, grounding, and heavy with questions. At home, the routines continued, but he found himself pausing longer at the doorway of his child's room, watching the rise and fall of a small chest, listening to the soft certainty of breath. The kiss in the hallway had protected him from immediate harm, but it had also reminded him how precarious his safety was, how much of his life he had hidden in order to survive. He began to wonder what it would mean to live without flinching. Pressure grew in subtle ways. Meetings about optics turned into conversations about leadership pathways, and leadership pathways came with unspoken expectations about who he was allowed to be. He felt the old fear rise, the instinct to shrink back into invisibility. But the memory of that small, brave act lingered like a lantern in a dark corridor. He started to take careful risks, not reckless, not dramatic, but honest in the quiet ways that build toward change. He asked for flexibility without apology. He spoke about responsibility with a steadiness that did not ask permission. He refused to frame his life as a liability. The world did not transform overnight, but something in the air shifted. People listened when he spoke with the calm authority of someone who knows the cost of being unseen. At home, change arrived in softer forms. He began to let light into the rooms of his life he had kept shuttered. A neighbor learned the rhythm of his mornings. A teacher heard the truth of his evenings. The small circle of people who knew him not as a role but as a human being grew, and with it came a surprising lightness. He was still careful, because care is part of love, but the carefulness no longer felt like a cage. It felt like wisdom shaped by experience, guided by hope. The woman who had kissed him in the hallway remained a quiet presence of support, a reminder that sometimes the bravest help arrives without fanfare and leaves no debt behind. He never asked her to carry his secret. He learned, slowly, to carry it with less shame. The city continued to glitter with its hard promises, but he learned to measure success differently. Success became the sound of laughter at the kitchen table, the way tiredness felt like proof of effort rather than failure, the calm that arrived when he told the truth in small, brave increments. He discovered that protection does not always mean concealment, sometimes it means building a world where the truth can stand without trembling. The glass tower did not soften overnight, but cracks appeared in its reflections, and through those cracks, real faces began to show. He saw that institutions change when people refuse to disappear inside them, when kindness interrupts the machinery of indifference long enough for humanity to breathe. In the end, it was not the kiss that exposed his secret, it was the courage it awakened in him. The moment that had begun as a shield became a mirror, showing him the cost of hiding and the possibility of standing in the light without losing what mattered most. His life did not become easier in the way fairy tales promise, but it became truer in the way real lives do. He learned to accept help without shrinking, to offer honesty without weaponizing it against himself, and to build a future where his child would grow up knowing that love is not something to hide from the world. The city kept moving, elevators kept chiming, and people kept watching reflections in glass, but he walked forward with a steadier heart, carrying a quiet gratitude for the kindness that had met him in his most fragile moment and turned fear into a doorway. If this story stirred something in you, if it reminded you of the power of small acts, the courage it takes to be seen, or the way kindness can change the direction of a life. Please like this video, share it with someone who might need that reminder today, and subscribe to the Kindness Chronicles so more stories like this can find their way to hearts that need them. And before you go, drop a comment below and tell us the one small